1930s 2.0. This is the kind of rhetoric, the kind of destabilized international system looks a lot like the 1930s. When you look at like how states were interacting with each other, the rise of the far right, just sort of the rampant lawlessness in the international scene, it looks a lot like today.
Taking center stage is Roy Casagranda, a historian and political philosopher known for his sharp critiques of American power and global politics. In this episode, he talks about the erosion of soft power in the U.S. and how the U.S.'s growing reliance on military and economic coercion signals an empire in moral and political decline. Roy Casagranda, thank you very much for joining us on Center Stage. I want to put a simple idea to you, and you tell me what you think. And it is this feeling that the world right now rewards strength, hard power, whether it's economic or military, a lot more than it has in quite a while. And inversely, soft power, the ability to lead or influence through your ideas and values, that has no currency. That gets you almost nothing in 2025. And that Donald Trump is right in the middle of this shift. How do you feel about that proposition?
Yeah, it's definitely partly true. Where I hesitate is I don't think Trump is the beginning. I think it started before Trump. I think Trump has taken it in a way that maybe nobody had expected it to go. Part of Reagan's administration was trying to overcome what he called the Vietnam syndrome, which was this belief that the Vietnam defeat for the United States left this bitter taste in the American voter, and they didn't want to do war ever again. So he spent his 8 years trying to figure out how to get us a win, thinking if the American voter experienced a military victory, they would like war again. And of course he failed, right? And he ends up doing this disaster in Lebanon and then tries to make up for it with Grenada, and nobody bought it. George Bush Sr. comes in and he's got the same kind of attitude, and he gets 2 wins, Panama and then Iraq. And so in a way, that was some of the momentum that led us to this moment. Bill Clinton decided with the fall of the Soviet Union that since the United States was now the hegemonic superpower, that the United States didn't need to play the kind of game it had been playing in the Cold War, that it could sort of rest on its laurels that it had won victory. But he did something that I think in retrospect was pretty catastrophic. And then George Bush Jr. comes along and tears up the world order by doing the second war on Iraq without getting the consent of the UN, without getting the world on board. It was the end of the international order that the United States had spent so much time creating after World War II, which was that there was at least going to be the pretense of international law. It didn't mean we had to actually do it, but we're going to at least pretend we were doing that. And then I think Obama tried to restore the old system, and he mostly failed, and he in fact increased the number of wars the United States was in. And then I think Trump thought all of that was permission for him to come in and play the kind of game that he's been playing, which I think it isn't just that he acts like he's a mob boss, because he does, right? It's all about you need to comply or I'm going to hurt you. I think he just doesn't understand the system. So, he came into a game and that it was a chess game, and he's trying to play checkers. And the only thing he knows is to go in and ask for concessions and try to bully you into submission, because he doesn't understand the other game, which was much more complex.
My algorithm is giving me a lot of talk on empire, usually about the decline of empire and drawing parallels between the U.S. and a declining empire. Do you see that?
So the history of empires are that usually as they start to go into decline, they start to thrash about. Because they're trying to hold it together somehow, and it's not working. You have power, you have wealth, and it's slipping from you, and you're trying to hold on. So it's reaching for other ways to create that influence as it's losing the influence. And it's shocking to me because I don't understand why they thought this was the way to do it. I'm going to hit you with 50% tariffs. Like it's such a failure of diplomacy. you're threatening to wreck the global economy because you want a concession out of somebody. It's like what a mob boss does. It's not what a diplomat does. It's not what a politician does. And it looks weird, but also the stakes are so high.
I want to drill down on soft power a little bit. And to make sure everybody's on the same page, this was a notion developed by the political scientist Joseph Nye in the 90s, and it's the idea that you can co-opt rather than coerce. Did the U.S. have soft power? And does it still have soft power under Donald Trump?
So the U.S. definitely had soft power even before the concept came into being. And that's what the Marshall Plan was, right? We'll help Europe rebuild after World War II, with the understanding that on the other end, you owe us your allegiance. We'll set up a boogeyman, the Soviet Union, and we'll scare the world around Joseph Stalin because his mustache was so frightening. And then we'll pretend that we're there to stop him from being aggressive. And so, we played a really good marketing game. And so much of the world bought into it, and still does. There are still plenty of places and plenty of people that think, well, the U.S. is still the world's good guy.
You disagree?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think what we did in Iraq, for example, or Vietnam, show that we're definitely not the world's good guy. Our support for Israel owing genocide shows we're definitely not the world's good guy. And I don't know that we ever have been, right? I mean, to create the United States, you had to genocide the Native Americans and then throw in African slavery to create the kind of economy that we have today. We benefit from that slavery. We've never done anything to compensate for that.
The corner that I think would defend the U.S. as being the world's good guy or the world's better guy, maybe it's not good, bad, it's better, worse, would say, well, the U.S. was a beacon of democracy. The U.S. had humanitarian values that it exported, sometimes with violence, across the world, and that was still a positive influence. That would be the argument for the camp that says the U.S. is still the better guy.
Yeah, I think that the United States really hurt its brand with the types of overthrowing democracies. We started in 1949 overthrowing al-Quwatli in Syria, and then we overthrew Mossadegh in Iran in 1953, and then Arbenz in Guatemala in 1954, and we murdered Patrice Lumumba in Democratic Republic of Congo. All these things that we were doing in addition to the war, none of that made the world a better place. It served to destabilize the world and make the world less of a good place. Our rhetoric was human rights, but at the same time, we're supporting Israel and its genocide against the Palestinian people. That's 77 years. It's not like it just started in 2023. It started in 1948. And it's hard for me to hear the argument and take it seriously. Having said that, the words we were saying were really pretty. They were nice, like freedom of religion and freedom of speech.
What about some real world examples? USAID is a case in point, right? So this was past tense now.
Yeah.
The U.S.'s foreign assistance program. So they were active and they funded programs for agriculture, for health, they would teach farmers to get better, higher yields from their crops, things like that around the world, all funded by the United States. And that was the textbook example and has been for decades of soft power. And Donald Trump saw no value in it because he defunded almost all of it and folded USAID into the State Department earlier this year. Is there a cost to the United States for relinquishing what has been a textbook example of soft power?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few costs. The first one is our PR, right? We will lose esteem, prestige, influence in the world. People will not look up to the United States for, this is the country that runs around helping people. Now, the United States has never been especially generous. So USAID was a great program, and it definitely probably made the world a better place. But as a percentage of our GDP, Sweden spends 10 times more of its budget on foreign aid than the United States. A huge portion of U.S. foreign aid is military foreign aid. And so in a way, the United States will be remembered tragically for being too stingy with foreign aid and allowing too much of that foreign aid to go for military purposes. The bulk of our foreign aid at one point was going to Colombia, Egypt, and Israel. and Colombia to fight FARC, Egypt to not attack Israel, and Israel because it's Israel. And you think there were so many places on the planet that needed money, and there were so many ways you could have made the world a better place, and that's where you put your emphasis. It shows a lack of conscience, and it shows a lack of foresight, and it definitely shows that the goal wasn't humanitarian.
So when the U.S. abandons this soft power leverage, we just said it shut down USAID, there are other examples, who steps into that void? Does someone necessarily step into that void?
I mean, I think China is going to step into that void. They'd be foolish not to at this point. They've got the economic might, and they need the PR, right? I think people still look to China as maybe a little bit backwards and a little bit authoritarian. If you've traveled to China, you'll see it. They're not backwards. They're the future. They're on a rocket ship. But I don't think they've done a great job of selling that. And I think one of the ways they can do that is foreign aid. Europe should keep doing foreign aid. Europe has a history of doing foreign aid. It's just, I feel like Europe has become sluggish, like it doesn't know what direction it wants to go in. Its preoccupation, of course, is now Russia and Ukraine, and it doesn't have a vision. It needs a vision. It needs some direction to go in. And one of the directions it needs to think about going in is replacing the United States, because it's clear that the United States has forfeit its position as the world leader, right? I mean, that's done.
But Europe doesn't have the kind of power the U.S. does. As economically, yes, but it doesn't have a unified government, and it doesn't have the hard power. Since we're talking hard versus soft power, it doesn't have an army.
They have to have one, especially now that the United States has proven to be an unreliable ally. I mean, just the fact that Trump won't say that he will honor Article 5 of the NATO treaty should have...
The mutual defense clause.
Yeah. The fact that he won't say point blank, yes, I will honor that, that should be enough for every single European leader. They should have gone, okay, that's it. It's time for us to pretend we're on our own, even if we're not. And we still have Canada, but the United States is clearly off.
Donald Trump, one of the first things he did in his second term, and some of them he had already done in his first term, but were then undone by Biden in the middle of the two Trump terms, was pull out of the clubs that the world has to solve problems jointly, right? So he pulled out of the World Health Organization, right. He pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords. What does that do for the world or to the world?
I mean, it destabilizes the world, because here's the largest economy, although China will pass it soon, but it's still the largest economy, largest military. So, it's a superpower, and it no longer wants to have conversations. It doesn't want to talk about how to solve the world's problems. Like, what does that mean for the world? And I think it's a wake-up call. And the wake-up call for the rest of the planet is you can't rely on, first of all, one entity to solve all your problems, especially if that entity is a capitalist entity that has an agenda that isn't necessarily in your best interest. The other thing that I think it's shown is that the American people aren't interested in taking care of the rest of the world. Why haven't we in the United States been working on climate change? We were the frontline guys. We could have easily led the way on actually doing serious work on climate change. That's the number one threat facing humanity right now. It's not war, it's climate. Because climate will probably lead to wars, right? And so why hasn't the United States been trying to solve it? And the answer is that the oligarchs who run the United States are greedy and they don't care. They only care about their bottom line.
Possible counter-argument. Tell me what you think. These clubs that we reference, the United Nations Security Council, we mentioned global health done by the World Health Organization, global trade done by the World Trade Organization. The list goes on. You could argue that each and every one of them has a mixed track record at best at solving the problems that it is supposed to solve. The most obvious one, we see it in the news every day, is conflict prevention. The UN is not at present good at doing that. It's not good at stopping the war in Ukraine, not good at stopping the war in Gaza.
Thailand, Cambodia.
Right. So you could make the argument, well, that's actually a great example. Donald Trump would tell you, I stopped the war between Thailand and Cambodia. He would also tell you it's one of the 6 wars that I stopped in 6 months. I have the list here somewhere.
Pull up the list. I'm curious.
List. Okay.
What is he claiming?
Here's the list. Cambodia, Thailand, India, Pakistan, DRC, Rwanda, Israel, Iran, Serbia, Kosovo, Egypt, Ethiopia. 6 wars stopped in 6 months. There's another one, Armenia, Azerbaijan. My point is Donald Trump might argue these multilateral institutions, they don't work that well. So you need the world's superpower to act decisively. And that's what he would argue he's doing.
Nagorno-Karabakh was completely conquered by Azerbaijan, so Azerbaijan resolved that conflict by winning. So whether or not Trump intervened or not, it kind of doesn't matter because it was by default resolved. The Egypt-Ethiopia one is fascinating to me because neither country obviously wants to go to war with the other one, and Sudan's in the way. I don't even know how that would look, and it's all over a dam and how much water that Ethiopia is going to put into that dam and how quickly. That needed somebody to sit down and mitigate. And so at the end of the day, having a person come in and say, I will help fix this, right? I'm not saying it's not great to have a leader that can do that. And maybe Trump even deserves some of the credit for having figured this out. I'm trying to figure out why the institutions that do exist, why he thinks they don't work, and why they haven't worked. And I think one of the reasons they haven't worked is the United States has been systematically sabotaging them for years. So it's almost like he's solving a problem that the United States created to begin with, which is a track record that the Republican Party in the United States is really good at doing. They'll create the problem and they'll come back, blame it on the Democrats, and then say, now we're going to come up with a solution. There's no solution. It's all window dressing. And so to rely on an individual instead of an institution means that there's no legacy. There's no lasting standard. That's the problem with this. And the precedent the United States has set is we're on our own. We don't need the rest of the world. We don't need consensus building.
We mentioned the United Nations Security Council, but there's also the system of international law that we have. There is on paper a robust system of international law with two major global courts, the ICJ that can put states on trial, and the ICC that can put individuals on trial for criminal behavior. There's a robust framework of law. There are courts, there are judges, there are cases that are being brought, but all of that, when you watch the news every day, feels very academic. It feels very theoretical.
It does. And the United States has been undermining those two courts since Reagan.
Yeah, the U.S. has put sanctions on the International Criminal Court, and it doesn't feel bound by rulings of the ICJ, not necessarily, not automatically.
No, there was a ruling in the 80s because the United States was mining Nicaragua's ports and ships were being damaged in the mining, and there was a ruling against the United States, and Reagan said, we don't have to listen to that. And I think the precedent was then set that, if the United States doesn't listen, why should anybody else? And then, of course, in the Security Council, one of the great tragedies has been the usage of the veto. How many Security Council resolutions have been passed to try to force Israel to the negotiating tables to resolve the Palestine conflict, and the United States comes in and vetoes every single one of them. So I'm not saying the institutions are great. They're clearly profoundly flawed, and they're built in a way that the United States has definitely abused them and ignored them. Throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I think, is the mistake here. I think what we need to do is how do we fix those institutions and then make real use of them. Obviously, there are plenty of countries on the planet that don't want those institutions to work because they want to conduct human rights violations. And so in a way, we're creating a Wild West scenario where there's no law.
You mentioned the U.S. using its veto, by the way, to defend Israel at the UN. The number is 49. It has used that veto 49 times. So hard power it is then. I mean, based on everything you've been telling us, the guardrails against the excesses of hard power aren't really working. The multilateral institutions, they've been either bypassed or completely ignored. So we're back to hard power. Donald Trump renamed the Department of Defense Department of War.
Yeah.
What did you think? Did you laugh? Did you cry? Or did you just think maybe it's more honest that way?
I mean, it is more honest, to be honest. It used to be called the Department of War, and then we renamed it
a long time ago.
After World War II. We thought, okay, if we're the good guys, we need to make it look like we're doing something good. Defense sounds better than war. So he's signaling to the world that he doesn't need to seek peace. He's going to, carry a big stick and shout loudly. I mean, that's the difference between him and previous presidents. Theodore Roosevelt famously said, carry a big stick and speak softly. And the dog that barks is the scared dog. The dog that sits calmly and stares you down is the dog that's confident that they're going to win this conflict. And I think that's where this seems like there's something really wrong here. There's a person who clearly needs attention, who's an attention seeker, who's shouting all the time and threatening his allies, threatening friends. He doesn't understand some of the nuances of diplomacy, like in his first term, so going all the way back to 2017. After he's elected, he gets all these congratulatory telephone calls. Well, one of those calls came from the Republic of China, Taiwan. Well, the tradition is when you see it show up on the caller ID on the phone, you don't answer. But at least that way the president of Taiwan has said, congratulations, you knew that they were, but don't answer. He picked up the phone and created an international incident because now the PRC is furious. You picked up the phone? You're supposed to pretend they're not real. And the fact that he did it wasn't because it was deliberate, he didn't know. That's the danger here. Having a person walking through a minefield who doesn't understand what mines are, or let alone where they are, inevitably there's going to be a mistake at some point down the road just because there isn't the cultural, institutional knowledge that was supposed to be handed on from one administration to the next has just suddenly evaporated, and we've hit this really weird space.
I want to ask you about the domestic political situation in the U.S. briefly. The right-wing activist Charlie Kirk has been killed by a gunman. Do you connect the dots of that type of what appears to be political violence, definitely, and the political rhetoric in the U.S. at the moment? Do you connect those dots?
Oh, I definitely think that there's a connection between the two. It's worth pointing out the United States has always had a history of political violence. I think there are a lot of people who are shocked. Where did this political violence come from? 11% of our presidents have been assassinated, making it one of the most dangerous jobs on earth, right? Like, what other country on earth has 11% of its leaders assassinated?
And there was more than one attempt on Trump.
More than one attempt on Trump. Like, we have had a lot of assassination attempts. And then you think about Bobby Kennedy, Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. We have a history of political violence. Having said that, it seems like there was a little bit of a lull. Like, it wasn't quite as dangerous to be politically active in the United States in, say, the last half century. And so it feels like we're going back to the old normal and that this lull was just a temporary thing. And it is definitely tied to the type of rhetoric we've been having. And it's not just Trump. And this sort of demonizing the other side has been building to the point where the United States is split. It looks a lot like it did in the 1850s. People in the United States don't like each other. They're moving from neighborhoods because they don't want to be, my neighbor is a liberal or a conservative and I hate that. And they're literally selling their house and moving to a new city, a new state, just so that they can be amongst people that have similar ideas. That is a formula for disaster. So my fear is this is the start. This was sort of the signaling point for a United States that becomes increasingly more and more violent. And part of it is this transactional attitudes. Part of it is this demonizing the other side. And for what? Like, people are attached to their ideology. You want to lower taxes? Okay. So why are you a fanatic about it? It's like, who cares? It's such a small thing in the grand scheme of things. Or you want to limit tattoo parlors in your city. What's at stake? There's nothing really at stake. And people act like it's life and death and they're willing to kill each other over it. And that's also really baffling to me.
Well, I have heard you say that all ideologies are dumb. Those are your words,
yes,
right?
Yes, those are my words.
I know you're not big on ideology to begin with. If you look to the future, whether it's the domestic situation in the U.S. or internationally, which is what we've been talking about, how do you think we will look back on this moment? A blip, an outlier, or part of a bigger trend?
1930s 2.0. This is the kind of rhetoric, the kind of destabilized international system looks a lot like the 1930s. The big difference, of course, is we're not in the middle of a depression. But when you look at like how states were interacting with each other, the rise of the far right, just sort of the rampant lawlessness in the international scene, it looks a lot like today. And so I think...
So pre-World War is what you're saying?
I think we're in really big trouble. I think we're going to ignore the major problems. Climate change is the biggest one facing us, but we have other problems as well. The United States has serious problems like how much longer can it maintain its debt? I think we're at $38 trillion now. Like, at what point do we reach a point where banks are like, yeah, we're not going to loan you money to pay us the interest on the loans that we've already given you? That's a big debt. How do you come back from that? And so, like there are serious problems that countries locally have, and then the world globally has. And I don't think we're going to do anything to solve them. And then at some point, people are going to start to get desperate. At some point, we'll reach a point where we don't have enough fresh water, or we don't have enough food.
It's all dark.
It's all dark. I don't like the future I'm looking at. And the tragedy is what we need to do is sit down and talk out these problems in a serious way, where there are real concessions. And the rich countries need to be giving big concessions, because the poor countries are going to have a hard time actually having any meaningful impact, because first of all, they're not contributing as much, but second of all, they don't have the ability to do the kind of corrections that a country like the United States has, or that Europe has, or Japan, or China for that matter. And so how do you get each individual state to sit down, set aside a little portion of its greed, and then seriously work on a problem?
Roy Casagranda, thank you very much for joining us on Center Stage.
I'm sorry for being so dark.